his eye. I didn't say, what are you looking so sad about, Jam?
Man, I'm surprised at you. I mean, I'm really insulted. I mean, that's not right what you just said.
What do you mean, what I just said?
I mean, I'm getting a drink of water. I'm late getting home, but you talk. I said something about the greatest heavyweight champ, man. I'm a hometown man, and you talk about Joe Louis, man. Joe Louis wouldn't be nothing for me. Joe, I tell you, Joe, do you think you would have stood a chance with me?
Well, Clay, one time during my career, I went on a Bomber of the Month tour.
Bomber of the Month? I would have been a bomb compared to you.
Well, you've been on the tour.
What's happening, my people? It's Cast Sports again, back for another afternoon with the family. That's right. You know what time it is. If it's Monday through Friday, 2 p.m., it's the Box Historian, bringing you all that boxing history. Boxing is the greatest sport of them all. That's why we love it. Can't get enough of it. Salute to everyone and welcome to another episode of Cast Sports, the Box Historian. Today, heavyweights of the 1930s. Heavyweights of the 1930s. We're going to look at some heavyweight champions of the 1930s. The 5 champions that preceded Joe Louis, of which he beat every one of them. Okay? But how's everyone this afternoon? Still early in this big week of boxing history we are embarking on. We got a lot to get to today. So let's jump right into it. Starting out with today's fight of the day. Okay? So let's get started with today's show. Start out with the fight of the day. Okay. The fight of the day today is going to be George Foreman versus Ron Law. Big heavyweight fight from 1976. These two big heavyweights went at it. Big George Foreman, Ron Law. Okay. George Foreman had been beaten by Muhammad Ali. And this was one of his last fights before he went on his 10-year hiatus from the sport before he came back in the 80s, remember? For the second career of Big George Foreman. Like an entirely different person. But let's get into it. The fight of the day. Big George Foreman versus Ron Law. January 24th, 1976. Foreman versus Law. Following his surprising defeat to Muhammad Ali in one of the most historic fights in boxing history, George Foreman returned from Africa, not just a former champion, but a man psychologically wounded. It took years for their wound to heal. The fearsome puncher and Olympic gold medalist who had stopped 37 out of 40 opponents and demolished Joe Frazier and Ken Norton with frightening ease, now found himself in nothing less than a crisis of identity. Few had anticipated an Ali win, as the younger George was regarded as one of the toughest, strongest, and most powerful big men in boxing history. Huge, menacing, and carrying the most lethal heavyweight fist since Sonny Liston, Foreman's image was that of an invincible destroyer, and it was a major shock to the sports world when the greatest not only outsmarted and outboxed the champion, but put him down for the count. Okay? Yeah, the greatest put him down for the count. Here it is. Mike Rim in the building. What's up, Mike Rim? Salute. Fight of the day today is George Foreman and Ron Law. And we have the Exploding Fist Ninja in the building. What's up? Way of the Exploding Fist Ninja. Salute. Cat Sports the Box Story Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Bringing you all that boxing history. Salute, Way of the Exploding Fist Ninja. Welcome to Cat Sports. Hope you stick around and enjoy today's show. Okay, let's continue with the fight of the day. George Foreman versus Ron Law. There's Ali when he shocked the world. For the second time in 10 years, he did it the first time, Sonny Liston, almost 10 years exactly, when he stopped Sonny Liston, and then he turned around and stopped George Foreman 10 years later. Okay, so, and it was an equally huge shock to George himself. Nothing could have prepared him for the agonizing process of salvaging what was left of his confidence and resolve after suffering a humiliating loss to a solid 4-1 underdog, after having his ego and his aura of invincibility shattered by an opponent who made him look like a stumbling, bumbling novice in front of a massive crowd. They gleefully cheered his downfall. And part of the reason for this was that Foreman's public image and his own identity had gotten tangled up with one another, so much so that George really did regard himself as an invulnerable force of destruction, unbeatable and overwhelming. Sure, he had lost from time to time in the amateurs, but no one had ever humbled him the way Ali did, and Foreman lacked the inner strength to withstand the resulting blow to his self-image. There's a nice drawing of Big George. The evidence of this is his inability to accept the loss and his immediate claim to being the victim of a fast count by the referee. When that didn't stick, Foreman declared he'd been drugged by his own corner before his showdown with the greatest. These dubious excuses only made the vanquished former champion a pitiful figure, and soon he had become nothing less than a laughingstock when, on national television, he took on 5 fighters, one after the other, in a bizarre spectacle at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto, Canada. The point of the exhibition was to reestablish Foreman's image as the most dangerous heavyweight in the world and force Ali to give him a rematch. But with Albert Cosell branding the whole thing a carnival and a charade, and with the crowd booing, throwing garbage, and chanting Ali, Ali, Ali after his victories, the sort of affair backfired completely, and Ali was at the commentating table with Albert Cosell, taunting Foreman, doing that 5 versus 5 thing he did. And the crowd was shouting, Ali, Ali, Ali. Right? Where the Exploding Fist Ninja says Foreman only had himself to blame in the Muhammad Ali loss. Could have not believed in his own hype. Good point, way up the Exploding Fist Ninja. Yeah, Foreman thought he was unbeatable. Yeah, had his own self to blame. While George won all 5 contests, the fights were sloppy, even comical. The event more chaotic than anything else, with brawls erupting between rounds or after fights, and Ali constantly taunting Foreman from ringside. If an Ali vs. Foreman rematch represented a difficult sell, following the greatest surprise knockout win, this fiasco rendered it an impossible one. Yeah, that's what it was. A fiasco. There it is right there. Foreman versus the 5. I don't know why he did that. It just made him look worse. Foreman versus the 5. Now, of course, what no one could have possibly predicted is that the story of George Foreman would eventually become one of the most extraordinary and redemptive in the whole of heavyweight boxing history. From an Olympic gold medal to a shocking knockout of Joe Frazier for the title, to the Rumble in the Jungle, to an upset loss to Jimmy Young, and a full decade away from boxing, to a most unlikely comeback, complete with battles against Evander Holyfield and Tommy Morrison, to regaining the heavyweight championship of the world with an astonishing one-punch knockout of Michael Moorer. The whole decades-long saga is the stuff of movies and fairy tales, and yet it all happened, as Jim Lampley would famously exclaim, it all happened. Big George. Foreman was an Olympic champ. He got cocky after destroying Frazier. He could actually box. That's right. Very true. We're the Exploding Ninja. Now, but to fully appreciate Foreman's accomplishments, one needs to take a close look at what came next at his slugfest with Ron Lyle, some 8 months after the Toronto farce, after the 5 vs. 5. That win, perhaps more than any other, is the one that proved Foreman had the courage and character to go on and eventually become a true all-time great of pugilism. Without that most consequential win and what it demonstrated, the rest of the story might never have happened. And that brings us to our fight of the day. Following the debacle of the 5 vs. 5 in Toronto, George resolved to begin again. He hired new trainers, Gil Clancy and Kid Rapides, and set himself to face Lyle, a powerful and tough ex-con who had endured more than 7 years of hard time at Colorado State Penitentiary. And had even been declared clinically dead in the aftermath of a vicious prison brawl. Once released, Lyle battles his way to the top of the heavyweight division with wins over Oscar Bonavena and Jimmy Ellis before losing to Ali by an 11th round TKO the month after Foreman's 5-man circuit. And a lot of people said the fight against Ali shouldn't have been stopped. Lyle was leading. But Ali got a lot against him. There's Ron Lyle right there. The other half of today's fight of the day against George Foreman. BBO Sports TV. What's up, BBO? Appreciate you. BBO Sports TV from the Sports Talk Network. Salute, BBO. Yeah, BBO, the fight of the day today is George Foreman versus Ron Lyle. Now, Lyle had in fact given Ali all he could handle in the rounds leading up to the referee's stoppage, one that was loudly protested by the challenger and his handlers. And he had since rebounded with a knockout of awesome puncher Ernie Shavers. Thus, a victory over Lyle would go a long way towards restoring George Foreman's former status as a truly dangerous force in the heavyweight division. The fight was held at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and broadcast on national TV with Howard Cosell at ringside. And what transpired that January afternoon has since become nothing short of legendary. Ever after, when talk turns to the most action-packed slugfest in boxing history, one of the most action-packed slugfests in boxing history, Foreman versus Lyle never escapes mention. If not adulation, perhaps only the famous Dempsey versus Firpo struggle with its 11 knockdowns in 4 rounds, 4 minutes, as sees it in terms of its ferocity and wild ballroom brawl quality. Its almost cartoonish savagery. This was a young boy's fantasy clash between invincible superheroes or lumbering dinosaurs come to life, as 2 huge heavy hitters threw aside all pretense of technique and strategy and simply took turns blasting each other with their best shots. Yeah, that was a definitely. You put slugfest in the dictionary, you put George Foreman and Ron Lyle beside it, because that was the slugfest of slugfest. Yeah, that's right. Those 1970s prison cats were no joke. Oh, Foreman is Foreman is Webb, the Exploding Fist. That's your favorite boxer of all time. Okay, let's get back to the fight of the day. Okay. Now, the fireworks got underway in earnest near the end of the first round when Foreman made the mistake of dropping his hands after a clinch, and Lyle landed a crushing right that had George staggering all over the ring before the bell saved him from disaster. Round 2 saw the momentum shift dramatically. Now it was Lyle on the ropes and in trouble, but the timekeeper rang the bell a full minute early, robbing Foreman of a chance to capitalize. Round 3 also belonged to Foreman, as a somewhat passive Lyle appeared to be emulating Ali's victory over George and allowing the former champion to unload his heavy artillery. With 3 rounds in the books, it had already been an action-packed battle, but both warriors were in fact just getting warmed up. They were just getting warmed up at that point. After three rounds of just non-stop slugfest, just getting warmed up. There's Lyle on the deck. Okay. Round 4 was mayhem. Lyle smashed home another big right hand, but this time Foreman wasn't just hurt. This time, Big George hit the canvas like a 226-pound bag of wet cement. George got up, and Lyle moved in for the kill, but it was Foreman who scored with a wild right and then a hook that put Lyle flat on his back. For a moment, it looked like the brawl had been decided, but the man from Colorado beat the count and rushed back in for more. Both power punchers held their ground and continued to trade bombs, and soon enough, Lyle struck back, and down went Big George a second time. Again, it appeared the savage Donnybrook was decided, but the big Texan somehow got to his feet, and just as Lyle had been rescued by the bell in an abridged round 2, Foreman heard the sound of the bell to end round 4 and desperately lurched to the safety of his corner. So now the bell done saved both of them once. The bell saved the fight from ending twice now, one apiece. Okay. As the story goes, Gil Clancy confronted Foreman between rounds and gave him the news in no uncertain terms. He's hurt and you're hurt, said the trainer. The one that's going to win is the one who wants it most. Clancy then leaned close and stabbed Foreman in the chest with his finger. Do you want it most? The bell for round 5 rang, and it was evident that, despite heaving chests and trembling legs, both warriors wanted it. They collided at the center of the ring like a pair of enraged grizzly bears, and it was Lyle who had the advantage as he crowded Foreman and let his hands go. Barely a minute in, a thudding left almost put George down yet again, and he struggled to stay upright as Lyle tried to push him over the edge. Another left buckled Foreman, but the former champion righted himself and scored with a series of jabs and a hard right before Lyle returned fire with an impressive combination, uppercut hook, and a big right hand. But Foreman refused to go down and instead came back with 3 brutal right hands of his own. Yeah, they were going at it, man. They were going at it. This is round 5. Both men were on rubbery legs and teetering about the ring like drunken sailors on a storm-ravaged ship as the crowd went berserk. But surely, someone had to cave in from the non-stop punishment. And indeed, it was an exhausted and dazed Lyle who staggered backwards into his own corner. Then and there, the former champion, Foreman, went in for the finish, pouncing and firing a non-stop barrage, more than 20 unanswered punches before Lyle finally collapsed at Foreman's feet and was counted out. Yeah, Lyle collapsed. And that was the end of it. There's Lyle. Thus ended one of the most thrilling slugfests in heavyweight history. And while barely surviving an encounter with an opponent Ali had already bested, did little to convince the public that George deserved another shot at the greatest. The victory went a long way towards restoring some of Foreman's dignity and erasing the memory of that 5-man carnival in Toronto. But the win's true importance gets deeper. Yes, Foreman getting mobbed, and Foreman is mobbed as Lyle's handlers tend to their fallen warrior. Muhammad Ali aside, no one had pushed Foreman to the brink of oblivion like Ron Lyle. By coming back from the edge of what would have been a disastrous knockout defeat, if Foreman would have been finished if he'd have lost that one. But by coming back from the brink of what would have been a disastrous knockout defeat, Foreman proved something essential, not so much to the public as to himself. The real significance of this amazing brawl was that years later, when a bald 39-year-old overweight George Foreman decided to embark on the most unlikely of comebacks. He knew without a shred of doubt that he possessed the toughness and the inner strength to absorb not just the scorn of the pundits, but also the punches of Evander Holyfield and Alex Stewart and Jerry Cooney and Michael Moorer. And he knew this fact because a man as tough and strong and brave as Ron Lyle had taught him in a most brutal and unforgettable manner the vital lesson. Yep. Fight of the day, George Foreman versus Ron Lyle. What a fight that was, man. The drunk Irishman in the building. What's up, the drunk Irishman? Okay, that was the fight of the day. So now, we're going to look at some of these great heavyweight champions of the 1930s. The five that preceded the Brown Bomber. Okay? But how's everyone today? Appreciate you way up the Exploding Flat Ninja putting some good gems in the chat today. Al Booger in the building. What's up, Al Booger? How are you today? Okay, yeah, the fight of the day was George Foreman versus Ron Lyle. Now we're going to look at, in the 1930s, the five heavyweight champions that preceded Joe Louis. Okay, let's take a look at that. Heavyweight champions, heavyweights of the 1930s. Okay. Wow, almost 2:32. Yeah, the fight of the day is supposed to last till 2:30. We almost made it. So let's get started. A salute to everybody in the building so far today. We have Al Booger, the drunk Irishman. Way Up the Exploding Fist Ninja, BBO Sports TV, Mike Grimm, and Miss Cass. Okay, yeah, all is well, Al Booger. Okay, let's see. Okay, now, heavyweights of the 1930s. Now, before Joe Louis became the heavyweight champion in 1937, the title was held by James J. Braddock, who defeated Max Baer in 1935. Now, prior to Braddock, Baer held the title, winning it from Primo Carnera in 1934. Now, Carnera had won the title in 1933. Before Carnera, Jack Sharkey held the title, defeating Max Smelling in 1932, which was a rematch. Smelling had previously won the title from Sharkey in 1930. Now, after all five of these fighters were champions during the 1930s, Joe Louis defeated them all later in the decade, becoming world champion in 1937 and holding the title for the longest reign in boxing history. So on today's show, we will take a look at these five world heavyweight champions who preceded Joe Louis: Sharkey, Smelling, Carnera, Baer, and Braddock. Okay, we're going to start with Max Baer. Okay, yeah, we're going to start with Max Baer. All right, heavyweight champions of the 1930s. Starting with Max Baer. Okay, pardon me for one moment. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Max Baer. Here's Max. Okay. How's everybody this Tuesday afternoon? Still early in this big week of boxing history. Now, how good of a boxer was Max Baer? He was the champion early in the decade of the 1930s. One of the five that preceded Joe Louis. And I told you before, Joe Louis beat all five heavyweight champions that preceded him. And that's who we're talking about today. Jack Sharkey, Max Smelling, Primo Carnera, Max Baer, and James J. Braddock. And of course, James J. Braddock was the one Joe Louis defeated for the title when he first won it. Yeah, when Max Melling beat Joe Louis, he wasn't champion yet. Yeah, that was just his first loss of his career. Yeah, Max Baer is a great fighter. We're the Slowly Ninja. Let's talk about Max. Now, Max Baer, they called him the Crown Prince of Boxing, but he was a great fighter. One of the top 100 of all time, out of like 31,877 professional fighters in history. Now, Baer was also undisputed world heavyweight champion, right? He was an undisputed champion back then, because at 35, I mean, when he was champion, we had in the 30s, we had the New York State Athletic Commission was the sanctioning body, and the National Boxing Association, which became the World Boxing Association. And those two, you had those two, you were undisputed. And who Max Baer really was. Now, most people only know what the movie Cinderella Man claimed about Max. The real Max Baer was completely different. In truth, the real Max Baer Sr., because, you know, Max Baer Jr. was Jeffro from the Beverly Hillbillies. Remember, also had a brother, Buddy Baer, that boxed. Okay? Now, the real Max Baer Sr. was absolutely nothing like the caricature that Ron Howard put on the screen in the movie. Ron Howard felt that he had to create a movie villain to show the audience what a heroic figure James J. Braddock was, the Cinderella Man. Now, Max Baer in real life was a fun-loving and charismatic man. He was considered by many, including Nat Fleischer, the founder of Ring Magazine, to be the heavyweight most responsible for keeping the fans interested in the heavyweight division during the onset of the Great Depression. Max Baer was the first fighter to realize that public perception of him was part of his appeal and part of how he could make money, that it affected the box office. He was unquestionably the first really popular heavyweight since Jack Dempsey's a decade earlier, okay? Baer's personality made him perhaps the most popular heavyweight boxer in the era between Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis, okay? Between Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis. Baer was the most popular heavyweight. And back then, the heavyweight division was the thing. You know, we had some lower divisions and everything, but heavyweight division was all about the heavyweight division back in those days. And Max Baer was a great fighter. BoxRec ranks him 69th of all time, right? And his record is certainly worthy of that. Anthony Mason, boxing writer, said, "I think that the only way to fairly rank a boxer's place in history is by comparing their resumes. And that does not mean just wins and losses. It is too easy today to fight only has-beens or never will be's and run up the record. Okay? It's not just who you fought, it's when you fought them. Okay? Baer fought the following top 9 100 heavyweights of all time. He fought Joe Louis, who is ranked number 1. Tommy Loughlin is ranked number 12. Max Smelling, Roscoe Toles, Primo Carnera, Jack Sharkey, Lou Nova, Ernie Schaff, Tony Galento, and Tommy Farr. And of those 10, Max beat 8 of them at least once. A higher percentage of wins against top competition than Vladimir Klitschko, and he faced better competition than George Foreman or Mike Tyson. In June of 1935, Baer lost his heavyweight title in one of history's biggest upsets to James J. Braddock. Now, Baer had taken Braddock lightly and barely trained for the fight. He was soundly outboxed by the underestimated Braddock, who was a very good light heavyweight. whose career had been derailed by injuries. And now healthy, he won the heavyweight title for Max Baer. Now, 3 months later, Baer launched a desperate attempt to win his title back by fighting #1 contender Joe Louis. Now, if Baer would have won this fight, he would have got another title shot. If he lost, his title hopes were gone forever. Now, because every hope he had of reviving his title hopes depending on his facing and beating Joe Louis, Baer ignored worsening problems with his hands, fearing needed operations would cancel the fight, and he would never get another shot at the title. His hands were in bad shape, but he didn't have the operations that were necessary because he felt that would postpone the fight. Joe Louis, the #1 contender, would fight somebody else in the title eliminator, and Baer's title shot hopes would be gone, right? In a further desperate effort to find a miracle, Baer convinced Jack Dempsey to work with his corner, hoping some of the magic would rub off. It did not, of course. Max Baer desperately wanted his title back, and he had to go through, of all people, Joe Louis to do it, right? Joe Louis was the #1 contender. This was a title eliminator. And Baer had to go through Joe Louis to get another title shot. James J. Braddock was the champion. This was the fight to see who would face him, right? So Baer was climbing a big hill in this one, to say the least, right? Now, Baer was a slugger, and a slugger who went in the ring against Louis with both hands badly injured. His right hand was broken. His left wrist was injured by a bone chip, and he could not use either hand. And you can tell by this clip that something was wrong because he just wasn't throwing punches. You can tell something was not right with Baer in this fight. Clearly, something was wrong with Baer and Louis. Just like throwing arm punches. See how Baer? See, that's Louis gonna back him into the ropes. Now, I knew a big reason he wasn't throwing because what was coming back at him. But yeah. See, he just wasn't throwing punches. And Louis was just teeing off on him. Yeah. And then Baer got knocked out in the next round. Yeah. But yeah, he had, like I said, he had a broken right hand and had some bone chips in his left wrist coming into this fight, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's something drunken. Yeah, that was a bad deal they made with that. Braddock got 10% of Joe Louis' purse for every fight for the rest of Joe Louis' career. That was crazy. Yeah. That's how bad Joe wanted to get back in there with Max Smelling, though, right? Mm-hmm. Now, Baer entered the fight against Louis with a broken right hand and a bone chip in his left wrist. His manager, Ansel Hoffman, pleaded with him to postpone the fight and get a specialist to examine his injuries. Now, Baer was examined by Dr. William Healy, an orthopedic surgeon at Johns Hopkins University Hospital in Maryland. Now, Dr. Healy told Baer that his left wrist would heal over time, but his right hand should be operated on before he fought again. But Baer decided to go ahead and fight Joe Louis instead of having the operation. And imagine, you're not just fighting you're fighting Joe Louis with these injuries, right? Just weeks before he was to fight Louis, Baer wrote to his wife, "I hope to God my hand heals before the fight." But the doctor already told him that it wasn't, right? You know, the doctor already told him that his hand was not going to be right for this fight. But he went ahead with it anyway. Dr. Max Stern gave Bear several shots of Novocaine in his right hand in his dressing room before the fight. But the fight was delayed for 45 minutes due to rain, and the Novocaine started to wear off because they were fighting outside, right? So the fight talk about bad luck. They gave a shot of Novocaine before the fight. Then the fight got delayed for 45 minutes due to rain. And by the time the fight started, the Novocaine started to wear off, right? So Bear had both hands disabled. He never really had a chance. He was fighting a losing battle. He never had a chance in this fight, okay? Bear's hands were still in bad shape from the Braddock fight, right? Like I said, his left wrist had a bone chip moving around. Right hand was broken. And like I said, his manager pleaded with him to postpone the fight, but he went on with it. And the doctor found that the metacarpal bones that ran from his right wrist up to his fingers were a mess. Max had broken all 4 knuckles in that hand. The bones had to be reset and rested for 9 months. The left wrist would heal over time, but Bear didn't have time. Madison Square Garden still had him under contract and had given him a 3-month window to meet and beat Lewis. No one, not even the Livermore Lurker, could beat Lewis with a broken right hand and a left hand with bone chips floating around in it. Nobody. And like I said, he took a Novocaine shot before the fight, but the fight was delayed. Now Bear, helpless with both hands crippled, was beaten from pillar to post, and Bear was knocked down for the first time in his career late in round 3. He got up at the count of 9, but was soon knocked down again by 3 left hooks to the head. The bell rang at the count of 4, and Bear was saved, literally, by the bell. It didn't matter though. Lewis dropped Bear for the 3rd and last time in the 4th round with an overhand right and a left hook. Bear fell to both knees and was counted out. That was his last chance at the title. Even Joe Louis wondered what might have been if Bear had been healthy. Even Joe Louis admitted it. What could this man have done with me if he had been healthy? Louis said, yeah, I wonder how it would have gone if he'd been healthy. But he went ahead and what happened, happened. And he won't get a title shot if I win the title. Max Bear had one of the great right hands in history. Jack Dempsey is quoted in Max Bear and the star David in this book saying Max Bear had one of the best punches ever, just a deadly right hand. He was called the Livermore Lurker. Bear has a 65% knockout rate, but it is deceptive because after Frankie Campbell's death, Bear was never the same fighter. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Frankie Campbell was the one that died after a Bear fight. Your Bear was never the same after the Frankie Campbell fight. The death of Frankie Campbell, not in the ring, but the following day, after his fight with Max Bear, was nothing like it was preceded in the movie Cinderella Man. Yeah, Cinderella Man just portrayed Max Bear totally wrong. Ron Howard was just trying to sell the movie, you know. Yeah, shameless. Just like you see these people on here clickbaiting, have a title, and shoots himself in the head. Then when the video, you never see nothing about somebody shooting himself in the head. That's just an example of shameless clickbaiting. That's how this movie Cinderella Man was. Ron Howard Max Bear was nothing like that. The movie Cinderella Man went out of the way to claim the 2 of Bear's earlier opponents, Frankie Campbell and Ernie Shaft, died from head injuries after losing to the rugged 6'2", 210-pound Bear. This also is at least partially wrong. Bear's son, Max Jr., famous for portraying Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies sitcom of the 1960s, has desperately tried to set the record straight. In a story in the New York Daily News, Max Baer Jr., the sunset of his dad's depiction in the movie. That's a lie. My father cried about what happened to Frankie Campbell. He had nightmares. He helped put Frankie's children through college. Indeed, Max Baer helped support Campbell's family for the rest of his life. Okay? Nor does the movie bother to say who Frankie Campbell really was. Frankie Campbell was born Francisco Corneli in April or May of 1904 in the town of Hibbing, Minnesota, to Italian immigrant. Like most fighters, Frankie rose from poverty, using boxing as a doorway to a better life. Now, the collapse of Campbell in the ring during his fight with Max Baer in 1930 is well chronicled. Rushed to the hospital, the doctors told his family there was a brain bleed and they feared the worst. A distraught Max Baer was at the hospital the entire night with Campbell's family. Details of what followed the fight are well documented in Max Baer in his autobiography. Okay, this is what really happened. Unlike the movie, the shameless movie, clickbaiting movie Ron Howard made. I never liked Ron Howard since that neither. Like Archie Bunker said on All in the Family, he was a meathead. Right? He's a real meathead. I mean, that wasn't him, that was the other guy. The other director, I'm sorry. Rob Reiner, I'm sorry, Rob. Ron Howard was still a meathead, though. Ron Howard played Opie and Andy Griffith. Okay, now, after the fight, the next morning, Frankie experienced hemorrhages of the eyes. You know what I mean? And leakages of blood down his spinal column as death approached. Now, while she was hovering in the hospital room where her husband's life was ebbing away, despite the administration of oxygen as a last resort, Max Baer, tears as big as golf balls falling down his face, visited the stricken fighter's bedside, where he offered Elsie Campbell, Frankie Campbell's wife, the hand that hit her husband. She took that hand and the two stood speechless, side by side for a moment, at Frankie's bedside. It was unfortunate. I'm awfully sorry, said Max. It even might have been you, mightn't it? Elsie replied. So she understood, what her husband, she understood boxing. And when Max Baer apologized for what happened to her husband in their fight, his wife told Max Baer that could have been you laying there. But she understood perfectly. But the movie didn't portray that part. Yeah, Ron Howard conveniently left that out, right? But his wife told Max Baer at the bedside, that could be you laying there, right? She knew what her husband had bought in. She knew what boxing was, right? And when reporters later asked of her feelings towards Max Baer, Frankie Campbell's wife replied, I have no room for bitterness in my heart today, only sorrow. As she sat beside her husband, Elsie's hand moved over her stomach and she whispered to Cal, working, I got to keep up for the baby's sake. She was pregnant at the time, right? At mid-morning, last rites of the Catholic Church were administered to Frankie by Fathers Keeney and Mallard of St. Paul's Church, with a lit candle laced between his crossed fingers. His family and his managers beside him. Frankie Campbell was pronounced dead at 11:43 a.m., 13 hours after the fight. Upon the surgeon's announcement of Campbell's death, Max Baer, who waited nearby, broke down and sobbed inconsolably. 2 days after Frankie's death, his funeral was held. It was one of the largest and most elaborate funerals San Francisco had ever witnessed. Among the mourners with the Campbell family's blessing was Max Baer. Max helped support Frankie's widow and family the rest of his life. Now, Ron Howard left that out of the movie too. It would have been nice if a single word of this was in the movie, or if people posting hateful questions about Max Baer had one iota of the truth. None of that was in the movie, none of it. And Bear himself was also a good actor. Bear was also a good actor. Appreciate your way up the exploding first ninja. Yeah, but ain't that something? His wife stood there by the bed when Max Bear apologized and told him that could be you laying there. She understood the sport of boxing and what her husband was into, right? But none of that was in the movie. And Bear was a good actor himself. Yeah, Max Bear was also an actor. Now, the real Max Bear Sr. was a man who was good at many things, including boxing, but who preferred acting to boxing, right? He made 19 movies and appeared in several popular television series of the 1950s, including The Lone Ranger, Sugarfoot, and 77 Sunset Strip. His movie credits include The Prize Fighter and The Lady with Myrna Loy, Abbott and Costello in Africa, and The Harder They Fall. When 1933's The Prize Fighter and the Lady was banned in Germany on the orders of Adolf Hitler, Bear commented, "They didn't ban the picture because I have Jewish blood. They banned it because I knocked Max Schmeling out," the German fighter, right? "It doesn't make much difference to me, but I am sorry for the women and children of Germany because they don't get to see it." Max Bear was the first fighter to wear the Star David on his trunks and proudly proclaim his Jewish heritage. Bear, who was 1/4 Jewish and proud of it, campaigned with the Star David on his trunks, something Ron Howard only showed once in the movie, and a fleeting view meant to keep the fact that Bear was a hero to Jews, already uneasy with the rise of Nazi Germany, out of the story. In the end, by the metric that really matters, the record who Max fought and who he beat, Max Bear was a truly great fighter. Like Ali said in The Greatest, when people ask me about who was the greatest of all time, I say, look at the records. Max Bear, okay? We're looking at the 5 champions that preceded Joe Louis in the 1930s. That was Max Bear. Isn't that something though? Yeah. Yeah, Frankie Campbell's wife really understood the sport, right? Because yeah, she told Max Bear that could be you laying there. You know, like her husband could have caught Max Bear with that shot. And you know, that's boxing. Right? Okay. So next we're gonna take a look at next is Jack Sharkey. Yeah. The 5 champions that preceded Joe Louis. He beat all of them. Let's take a look at Jack Sharkey. Now there's Jack right there. There's Jack Sharkey. World champion in the early 30s. Yeah, I'm reading all your great comments. Way up there, Exploding First Ninja. Appreciate you 1000%. Okay. Jack Sharkey. Like and subscribe, please. I'm trying to get to 1,000. I got 944. 3. I had 945 yesterday. We're doing it. I woke up, it was 943. What happened? Did somebody take their subscriptions back? No, YouTube play those kind of games. I don't know what be going on. They go up and down, but it's all good. Jack Sharkey. How good was boxing heavyweight Jack Sharkey? Okay. How good was Jack? Let's talk about it. Glad you asked. Pretty good. He was heavyweight champion. There were some great fighters in that decade, like I was talking about. These 5: Jack Sharkey, Max Schmeling, Primo Carnera, Max Bear, James J. Braddock, and most of them fought each other. Yeah. Okay, Jack Sharkey. All these fighters in the Hall of Fame. Now, Jack Sharkey is a long forgotten figure by most boxing fans, but he has a place in 2 very special clubs. The first is the International Boxing Hall of Fame, right? The second, He's one of the undisputed heavyweight champions, right? And over 100 plus years of the modern sanctioning era. He was called the Boston Gob, G-O-B, Boston G-O-B, Boston Gob. Jack Sharkey is one of boxing's most interesting characters. Now, though Sharkey is best remembered for losing the title on a foul in his earlier fight with Jack Dempsey, he's the only fighter to face both Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis. Wow, that's significant there. This man here is the only fighter to ever face Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis. Wow. And I didn't know that until yesterday. Yeah, I'm learning too, you know. Yeah, Gunboat Smith, Archie Moore, Jack Dempsey, Batman Bellolino, etc. That's right, Al Booker. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was where the Exploding Fist Ninja was Joe Louis. Yeah, let's talk about it. I think it's in here. Yeah, I did not know that before yesterday when I was reading over this, that Jack Sharkey was the only fighter to face Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis. Mm-hmm. Now, who was Jack Sharkey? Who was he? Now, the man who would become the fighter Jack Sharkey was born, Joseph Paul Zukowskis. Joseph Paul Zukowskis, right? Like the way the Exploding Fist Ninja said, he was Lithuanian. Okay? He was born on October 26, 1902, in Binghamton, New York, right? He was Lithuanian, right? His parents were come from an immigrant family. The dirt poor immigrant family moved to Boston when Sharkey was a small child, and he grew up hard. Sharkey later spoke of selling fish as a child. He said, when I was a kid, I used to catch bass with my bare hands and sell them. Old timers still remember me walking down the street carrying eels on my back. I guess catching them bass with his bare hands probably helped his speed and accuracy as a boxer, right? I guess, could it? Help the speed. I mean, catching fish with your bare hands. Wow. In the U.S. Navy, that Sharkey first stepped into he was in the Navy when he first stepped into a boxing ring. And it was only because a midshipman told him to substitute in the next fight, or he wouldn't get shore leave, right? Yeah. And you know, them sailors, man, they live for that shore leave. And somebody that outranked him told him if he didn't get in that boxing ring and fight, he wasn't going to get to go on shore leave when they got to the port. So, wow. And had never fought it before. So he had to get in there. He wasn't going to sit on the ship where everybody else go on shore. So he got in there, right? Yeah. And that's something. So, yeah, he was told if he didn't get in the ring and fight, he wouldn't get shore leave. Now, following a few dozen fights, that was the first time he ever stepped in the ring, was in. Following a few dozen fights, Sharkey was the Atlantic Fleet champion. And so he eventually headed back to Boston for his first pro fight. Wow. After just a few dozen fights, he was the entire Atlantic Fleet champion. And that's a lot of people. The entire Atlantic Fleet of carriers and submarines and all kinds of ships and boats in the Navy. Entire fleet. He was the champion after a few dozen fights. After that first time he stepped in that ring, when he was ordered to step in there or don't get shore leave. That's what got him into boxing and then fighting as a pro, Sharkey said. Shore leave. To get into saloons and girls in the Navy. Right? That's what got him into boxing, to get shore leave. Yep. However, he decided Joseph Zukowskis was not a name someone like a fighter should have. So he changed his name. Jack took his ring name from his two idols, heavyweight contender Tom Sharkey and heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey. He put them together. Took Jack Dempsey's first name, took Tom Sharkey's last name. Jack Sharkey, right? And heavyweight champion Jack Dempsey, hoping to sound Irish since he began his career in Boston. Yeah, he took his two idols' names and put them together. And Jack Sharkey was the Buster Douglas of his time. Immense talent, little discipline, right? The Cyber Boxing Zone website described him. Sharkey had good skills. He could hit with power, box well, and take punishment when he set his mind to fight. But he was an erratic, up and down boxer who never seemed to put all his skills together. Consistently, when he was good, he was very good. But when he was bad, he was awful. The Buster Douglas of his day. Yeah, Buster could have been so much. If that Buster that beat Mike Tyson would have ever showed up again, but we never saw that Buster again. Remember, never saw him again. Now Booger says, speaking of assuming new names, did you hear Tyson Fury's real name is Luke Tyson Partridge? No, I didn't know that. Wow. That's his real name, Luke Tyson Partridge. I didn't know that, Al Booger. Wow. Luke Tyson Partridge. Did I miss anybody coming in? No. Wow. I didn't know that, Al Booger. Wow. Now, Sharkey was a fine example of a fighter who did not devote himself to his craft. He drank, he partied, and when he did not train, he simply was not very good. Now, when he took it seriously and trained, he was a genuine Hall of Fame level champion. He did make the Hall of Fame. Now, Sharkey is the only fighter, like I said, to face Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis. Only fighter to face both of those champions. And he's remembered best for those two fights and his fights against Mike Smelly. Dempsey versus Sharkey. Jack Sharkey had entered the rankings at number 7 in 1925. By 1926, he was ranked number 2 behind Gene Tunney. So Tunney, after fighting Dempsey in 1927, decided the best strategy forward was insisting on a title eliminator before giving Dempsey a rematch, right? He said, let Dempsey and Sharkey beat each other up, weakening both. So the winner would come out weakened. No, after Gene Tunney defeated Jack Dempsey the first time, Tunney was not going to give Dempsey a rematch. So he announced Dempsey had to earn it by beating top contender Jack Sharkey. Now, Sharkey was willing to whip a faded Dempsey in order to get Tunney in the ring, saying, I want Tunney. He's the next man for me. But if I have to, I'm ready to battle Dempsey. Remember, Dempsey was one of his idols. After lengthy negotiations with Tunney, he secured an agreement to meet the winner in negotiations between the camps of Dempsey and Sharkey to determine purses. A contract with all three was accrued. Okay? Dempsey versus Sharkey, the winner to get Tunney. On June 14th, 1927, Dempsey's promoter, Tex Rickard, announced that Dempsey and Sharkey would fight at Yankee Stadium on July 21st, 1927, with the winner to meet Gene Tunney for the World Heavyweight Championship at a date, time, and place to be announced. Dempsey got a purse of $252,000, which would be $4 million nowadays, and Sharkey got $206,000, which would be $3 million nowadays in 2025. On July 1st, 1927, Dempsey and Sharkey met in a title eliminator at Yankee Stadium in front of 82,000 people. 82,000 people in 1927. That's crazy. Most sports experts thought Dempsey was shot, having lost his speed in the 3 years he took off before he fought Tunney the first time. In a pre-fight poll of 25 sports writers, 16 picked Sharkey to win. Only 9 picked Dempsey. Sharkey entered the ring as a 7-5 favorite to win this fight. Yeah, I know Al Booger. Al Booger is a historian too. I know you've been researching. Al Booger, I already know. Okay, so Yeah, Sharkey came in as a 75 favorite over Dempsey. Now, from the opening bell, it appeared the sports writers were correct, and Sharkey battered Dempsey from pillar to post. The radio broadcaster Graham McNamee told radio listeners during the fight broadcast that Dempsey was groggy and appeared to be ready to go after Sharkey batters him around the ring in the first round, third round, and again in the sixth round. Sharkey won the second, fourth, and fifth as well, but he wasn't as dominant, but he won all first 6 rounds. James Dawson of the New York Times wrote during the fight that Sharkey had badly outboxed Dempsey, leaving the former champion to flounder around the ring, flat-footed, bewildered, and staggering like a blind man. Wow. Sharkey was taking it to Dempsey. All of them. Harvey Woodruff of the Chicago Tribune wrote during the fight that Dempsey was finished and a gory sight after the 4th round. Indeed, Dempsey was bleeding badly, though his steady body punching in the 5th and 6th was starting to have an effect on Sharkey. Still, Sharkey was still controlling the fight, had it well in hand. And Dempsey admitted after the fight, "I thought he was going to knock me out, but in round 7, after Sharkey had won all his first 6 rounds, Dempsey turned it around by landing a series of vicious, low blows." Wow. Sharkey, face in pain, turned to the referee to protest and literally was doing so when Dempsey unloaded on him with a left hook to the chin while his hands were down and he was literally speaking to the referee. "Protect yourself at all times." Dempsey said, "I hit him with one of the last good punches of my career. It was everything I could throw. His chin was sticking out there unprotected. I couldn't miss." Sharkey turned to the referee, Jack O'Sullivan, and dropped his hands. He started to complain. "He hit me low," and Sharkey never got to finish the sentence. That was the end of it. He turned Sharkey's lights out with that punch. Dempsey turned Sharkey's lights out with one of the most egregious fouls in boxing history. It wasn't a foul. The foul was before that punch. The foul was the low blows. But Sharkey dropped his hand, started complaining to the low blow. That was a legal punch when he knocked him out in the chin. Yeah. Sharkey had dominated the entire fight up to that point, 7th round. But as Jack Dempsey cheerfully said later, "Protect yourself at all times. First rule of boxing." The kid didn't, and he went to sleep. Legal? Yes, it was legal. Strictly speaking, just when Floyd knocked out Victor Ortiz, that was legal, because Victor dropped his hands. But it certainly was different from saying simply that Dempsey knocked Sharkey out, right? Moreover, the fight, despite the win, showed that Dempsey was basically shot. He simply did not have the speed he had lost during his sabbatical. He took 3 years off. You remember, because he was complaining because they wouldn't let him fight the black fighter, Harry Wills. Remember, Jack Dempsey said, "Y'all won't let me fight Wills, I ain't fighting nobody." And it cost him because he lost to Tunney. And Dempsey's performance against Sharkey also confirmed to Gene Tunney, which he probably told friends, that Dempsey was not going to recover enough speed to catch him. And it cost Sharkey 3 years before he could secure another title shot. Now, Smelling versus Sharkey won. Okay. In 1930, Jack Sharkey and Max Smelling, the 2 top contenders, met in a title elimination fight for the vacant heavyweight title. Now, this fight was the first and only championship fight in history to change hands on a foul. Yeah, only fight ever to change hands on a foul. Just as Sharkey had dominated the fight with Dempsey until losing, he did the same thing with Smelling, dominated this fight. Sharkey won the first 3 rounds, but he was disqualified after he landed a low blow late in the 4th round. Smelling became the first and only heavyweight boxer to win the World Heavyweight Championship on a foul. Now, isn't that ironic? Sharkey lost this fight, got disqualified for a low blow. When Jack Dempsey repeatedly hit him with low blows in their fight, and Jack Dempsey never got disqualified, and Sharkey got knocked out while complaining about low blows. And then he get disqualified in this fight because he threw a low blow. Wow, that's crazy. And they did have a second fight in 1930. 1930 was when Smelling won the title on a foul from Sharkey. Only time ever. And they had a second fight. Then Smelling versus Sharkey 2. Which Sharkey won the title back in the second fight. Okay. So let's move on to somebody else because time is there. Okay. After Sharkey, we take a look at I didn't even go through Sharkey's picture. I think that's Sharkey and Smelling right there. That's I think that's Sharkey and Smelling again. So now we go to after Sharkey, Max Smelling. Let's take a look at Max Smelling. Yeah, let's take a look at Smelling. We've always talked about him in relation to Joe Louis, but we've never just took a look at Max Smelling's career and life. You know, he was German, and during that Joe Louis situation, everybody hated him because he was German. That's when Hitler and the Nazis was talking all that nonsense. But Smelling never supported the Nazi cause. Never did. Matter of fact, he saved a couple of Jewish teenagers from the Nazis. Hit them out. That's what it is. So let's talk about let's just talk about Max Smelling now. We're talking about the 5 heavyweight champions that preceded Joe Louis. Sharkey, Smelling, Carnera, Bear, and Braddock. We still got Smelling, Carnera, and Braddock to talk about. So it's Smelling. Let's take a look at Max Smelling now. That's him and Joe Louis right there. Lead up to their one of their fights. I think it was the second one. Yeah, Smelling saw something in that first fight. He really did, not like Mikey. Thought he saw something. Smelling saw Joe Louis throw that jab and then drop that hand low. Every time he throw the jab, he would carry it low after jabbing. And Smelling got him in the 12th round, came over. Well, he got him earlier in the fight. He really hurt him in the 4th. It controlled the fight from there. He dropped him earlier in the fight, and then he stopped him in the 12th. Knocked him out. Wasn't a TKO. Joe Louis was on one of those 10 count on the mat stoppages. Yep. Max Smelling. Right? Then Max Smelling was an undisputed champion. He held the New York State Athletic Commission and the National Boxing Association, the 2 major titles of that period. Yep. And he was the first man to beat Joe Louis. The only man to beat Joe Louis in his prime, right? Joe Louis had 3. Smelling. His other 2 was after his comeback when he should have been out of boxing. After he retired and came back, he lost to Ezra Charles and Rocky, his final fight. But Smelling beat him in his prime during his first career. Only man to do that, and the first man to beat him, right? Only man to beat Joe Louis in his prime. And he's a boxing immortal with a well-earned place as a member of the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Now, the facts and quotes below are taken from a number of sources, right? Now, Max Smelling is ranked number 27 of all time, 27th heavyweight of all time by BoxRec, okay? Only fighter to defeat Joe Louis in his first career in his prime, right? And Max Smelling was an even better human being than he was a boxer, right? And he faced all the greats of his era, faced all the great fighters of that time. Max Smelling did. Anthony Mason, boxing writer, said about Smelling. We read that on the other one, right? Now you compare the level of a fighter's competition when he fought them and the results. Yeah, resume, when, who he fought, when he fought, and the results, right? Now, here's some of the Hall of Fame fighters that Smelling fought. Of course, Joe Louis twice, Jack Sharkey twice, Max Baer, the Toy Bulldog, Mickey Walker, Young Stribley. He had 7 fights against Hall of Famers. He won 4. The only Hall of Famer that he failed to defeat at least once was Max Baer. And Max Baer wouldn't give him a rematch. Fought 4 world champions, beating 2 of them. He also faced tough contenders, Paulino Uscadun, Walter Nussel, Joe Sikra, Adolf Heiser, and Steve Harmers, among others. Those fighters alone had over 300 wins between them. Now, how did Max Smelling come to be a boxer? How did he get into boxing? Max Smelling. Maximilian Adolf Otto Siegfried Smelling was born in the Prussian province of Brandenburg in 1905. Now, he first became interested in boxing as a teenager when his father took him to watch a theater film of the heavyweight championship fight between Jack Dempsey and Georges Carpenter, the French fighter. Now, Dempsey became the young Smelling's idol, and he decided to become a boxer himself. He began boxing in amateur competitions, and in 1924, he won Germany's national amateur title as a light heavyweight. He then turned pro in the fall of 1924. Now, though Dempsey was his hero, Smelling developed a careful, scientific style of boxing, very much like Dempsey's nemesis, Gene Tunney. Remember the other day I was telling you, Gene Tunney was one of the first scientific boxers. Back around that time, 20s, when Gene Tunney fought, everybody just came out there and just basically stood in the middle and slugged it out. You know, Gene Tunney, Joe Gans, even Jack Dempsey was a little scientific, you know. But, you know, most of the time they just was slugfest. Like the fight of the day, George Foreman and Ron Lau. So yeah, and Jack and Max Smelling was scientific, right? Now, a hint that Max Smelling was a different type of human being came in 1928 when he hired Joe Jacobs, who was Jewish, to be his manager. And despite the best efforts of the Nazis to make him fire him, he stayed with Jacobs through thick and thin until Jacobs' death in 1939. So that should have gave people a hint that he didn't support the Nazis' causes. He had a Jewish manager, okay? And the Nazis tried to make him fire him, but he never did. Jacobs was with him until his death, okay? Through both Lewis fights. Now, Max Smelling rose from German amateur light heavyweight champion to world pro heavyweight boxing champion. In 1928, Smelling entered the top 10, an unusually fast rise, at number 3. And in 1930, the fight we talked about, he won the title on a foul from Jack Sharkey, the only heavyweight to ever do so up to this day. Then, of course, Sharkey beat him in the rematch in 1932. Though virtually everyone in attendance, including Dempsey and Gene Tunney, thought Smelling had won the rematch comfortably. Everybody thought he got robbed, right? I guess, you know, being German had a little something to do with that. You know, they was trying their hardest to let that title get in Hitler's hands. Because everybody thought that Hitler would get that title over there in Europe and force Smelling to fight low-level European contenders and keep the title over there as a propaganda tool, saying Nazis are superior. Look, we even got the heavyweight champion of the world, because heavyweight champion of the world was a really big deal back then. Hitler would have used that as a propaganda tool. Told you we superior. We even got the heavyweight champion of the world is Nazi, which Max Smelling wasn't. But he was German, and Hitler would have used that. So they robbed him. And then I told you when he beat Joe Louis in 36, that was a title eliminator. He was supposed to get the fight against James J. Bradley, but they gave it to Lewis for the same reason. They didn't want Hitler to get his hands on that title. Okay. So anyway, after he lost to Sharkey, after he got robbed against Sharkey, Jack Dempsey, who had no love for Jack Sharkey, was particularly outraged. And even Gene Tunney, who liked Sharkey, but was known for complete even-handedness, agreed with Dempsey that Smelling had been robbed in this fight. Now, the fight was broadcast worldwide on radio by NBC. The announcer was Graham McNamee, and he was joined by Charles Francis Coe, a well-known boxing writer, as analyst. Both men believed in broadcast that Smelling had won by a wide margin and made clear on the air that they thought the German had been robbed. It wasn't even a close fight, right? It wasn't even a close fight. Smelling won clearly, was robbed. Like nowadays, the Maxie Hughes and George Kambosos. Remember that robbery? Kambosos won like 2 rounds or something. But they gave it to Kambosos. Yeah, this was like that. Smelling clearly won the fight, but they gave it to Sharkey. Now, the New York State Athletic Commission, now when these two announced on the air, on the radio on the air that Smelling was robbed, one of the sanctioning bodies, the New York State Athletic Commission was outraged with the broadcast since it framed the claims the fight had been somehow fixed. The commission decided in the future that only boxing experts could broadcast fights, right? And the commission defined experts as sports writers, referees, or judges. So that's who the only ones they wanted to broadcast fights from then on, right? Because these commentators called it a robbery on the air. Now, defeat by stoppages to Max Baer in his second fight after losing the title seemed to finish Smelling as a serious contender, especially after it was followed by a decision loss to the lightly regarded Steve Harmers. But wins over Tough Pro's Walter Nussel, a draw and a win over Warhorse Paulino Uscadun, and a knockout of Harmers in their return fight, coupled with his ascension to the title, brought Smelling back to the number 2 contender slot and a date with destiny with the number 1 contender, the rising Joe Louis. Yeah, I told you that was that was the title eliminated. Smelling was number 2, Louis was number 1, and it was for the right to fight James J. Braddock, who was the champion at the time, right? Oh, you live in England, way up this Floating Fist Ninja? Okay. Salute. Yeah, Cash Sports is broadcasted in England today. Appreciate the way of this Floating Fist Ninja. Love all your comments you're putting in there. Appreciate you. Now, Smelling stopped Lewis in the only loss Joe suffered in his prime, right? And we talked about that the other day. It was 1936 and the backdrop of Nazi Germany and Hitler over there acting up. Smelling was the number 2 ranked contender, and he was the former heavyweight champion, right? And he shocked the world. Beat rising superstar Joe Louis. Louis was a 10-1 favorite coming into this fight, right? And Smelling was one of the first fighters to use film to study his opponent. Like I said, he noticed Joe curved his left low, and he dropped it after throwing that jab, leaving him open to counters. You know, when he threw the jab and then, you know, bringing it back to the defensive posture, he curved it low. And Smelling noticed that on film, right? Took advantage of it. And then, like I said, exactly like I was saying, after he beat Joe Louis, the German Nazi regime made Smelling's win a propaganda event for the Nazi Superman myth, even though Nazi himself was never a Nazi. Yep. And after he beat Joe Louis, he was denied his rightful title shot, right? Because he was now the number 1 contender. Because going into the first Louis fight, Louis was the number 1 contender, Smelling was number 2, and number 2 beat number 1. That should have made number 2 the number 1 contender, right? but Lewis got the title shot, right? Now, this is what happened. After Smelling beat Lewis, the U.S. boxing establishment, knowing Braddock could not beat Smelling and desperate to deny the Germans another propaganda victory, shelved the number one contender, and in 1937 wantonly ignored a contract so the number two contender, Joe Louis, was now number two because he got beat by Smelling. They allowed the number two contender, Joe Louis, to fight for the title and win it against Braddock. But Joe Louis' first defense was against Smelling. Joe Louis went against the commission. The commission didn't want Smelling to get a title shot, but Joe Louis had that loss. Smelling was the only one he wanted to fight. So Louis gave Smelling the rematch, and Smelling was destroyed. We talked about that earlier. That was the fight of the day the other day, remember? And after Smelling lost to Joe Louis in 1938, when he returned to Germany after his loss to Joe Louis, he was completely shunned by the Nazis, right? But despite being out of favor, he was spared arrest. He could have got arrested and lost his life. That's how Hitler and the Nazis carried it. But despite being out of favor with the Nazis, he was spared arrest and allowed to fight. And he won both the German and European heavyweight championships on February 7th, 1939, with a first round knockout of Adolf Husser. It was Smelling's last fight for 8 years. Now, Max, not in the good graces of the Nazis, was sent to the front lines to fight. He was forced into the military and sent to the front lines to fight. Now, during the war, Smelling, despite being age 35 by then, was assigned to the paratroopers and forced to fight on the front line by the Nazis, who resented that he never joined the party. Wow. He was over age for that type of assignment, right? The assignment was strictly retaliatory for his refusal to join the Nazi party and his refusal to fire his Jewish manager and his loss to Joe Louis. So they really didn't like Max, right? He wouldn't join the Nazi party. He lost to this black man, and he had a Jewish manager. Nonetheless, Max was wounded and crippled during the war, but he survived. And he came home to a ruined Berlin, completely destitute. Despite being worn down, partially crippled from a right knee wound, and 42 years old by that time, Smelling resumed his career in order to get food for his wife, who was starving, right? After World War II. And he had a bad right knee injury from the war, but he still came back to fight. He fought 5 fights, winning 3, despite effectively fighting on one leg. Then he retired a second time at age 43 with enough money to invest in a new business, which had come to Germany in return for a small investment, and his willingness to serve as a German spokesman for Coke. He was allowed to buy interest in his own bottling plant and held an executive position within the company. And he got to the Hall of Fame, and Smelling him and Joe Louis became best friends. Smelling was actually a pallbearer at Joe Louis's funeral. Okay, so let's look at another one of these great champions that preceded Joe Louis in the 30s. We got 2 more. The next one is going to be Primo Carnera. Let's look at Primo, because James J. Braddock was the last one. He was the one that Joe Louis took the title from. I keep forgetting to show my that's Smelling. That's not Smelling. That's Smelling. Primo Carnera is next. That's Smelling. That's Primo Carnera. We got big ears. Okay, let's talk about Primo. I wanted to cover all 5 of these champions that preceded Joe Louis. Primo Carnera. He was a mafia fighter, and they was fixing fights, and he was beating people, knocking them out. But Primo really thought he was that good. He didn't even know he was a mob fighter. But then when the mob got out, he started getting beat. Joe Louis destroyed him. But Primo thought he was like that. You know, he didn't know he was a mob fighter. He thought he was that good. Yeah, that's right, Al. Okay, yeah. Oh, he's talking to Way Up the Exploding Fist Ninja. Yeah. Yeah, Cat Sports is broadcasted in England today. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, but I really appreciate Way Up the Exploding Fist Ninja. And all the good stuff he's putting in there. Al Booger always dropping gems in the chat. Yeah, I'm used to that. Okay. Now, yeah. Way Up this, Primo Carnera. He was a pretty good heavyweight and a lot better boxer than he got credit for. You know, next to Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, he Joe Louis. Next to them two, right? Now, oh, come on. What did I do? Now, Primo did not suffer from gigantism. But he was also he was also undisputed. Who was Primo Carnera? He was born and raised in Italy. He began boxing there to make a living during the Depression after working first as a circus strongman. He moved to the United States in 1930 after success in Europe, right? He later became an American citizen and lived in Los Angeles, California. He was 6'6" tall, possessed an incredible 85-inch reach. Right, that's equal to Tyson Fury, 6'9". Primo fought at about 270, and he was not fat. All of it was muscle, extremely muscular. Okay, not an ounce of fat on Primo. Yeah, 270, but not an ounce of fat. See, look at that. That's Primo. Good shot of him. Now, yeah. And he was extraordinarily muscle and very simply a huge man. On June 29th, 1933, he became heavyweight champion after knocking out Jack Sharkey. He would make 2 successful defenses of his title against Paulino Escudun and Tommy Loughlin, both by decisions in 15 rounds, before being badly beaten and losing his title to Max Baer on June 14th, 1934. Baer knocked him down 11 times in 11 rounds. In 1938, Carnera, whose career had begun in 1928 and who at the time was age 32, he was forced to retire after his diabetes caused him to have a kidney removed. He returned to his home in Italy, where he lived quietly until having to make an unsuccessful return to the ring in 1945 due to poverty. After World War II, he retired again in 1946. Now his style. Primo was a huge man with immense strength and power in both hands. His 85-inch reach and powerful jab made getting to him difficult, right? Now, contrary to urban myth, Primo was quite mobile on his feet, and as his career advanced, he developed decent to good footwork. Now, as he learned on the job, Carnera worked and developed good boxing mechanics. His jab was actually quite good. Mm-hmm. His greatest weakness as his career advanced was his chin began to fail him. He had 88 wins, just 14 losses. 71 wins by knockout made him a member of a very elite group of boxers that won 50 or more fights by knockout. He holds the record for second most wins of all heavyweight champions with 88, second only to Ezra Charles with 95. He was the undisputed heavyweight champion. His 2 title defense wins over 2 very good challengers, including the number 2 contender Tommy Loughlin and top 3 contender and tough guy Paulino Escudun, does prove his championship was more than a one-hit wonder. He became a pro wrestler in 1946 and continued to work as one until the 1960s. He died in 1967 in his home in Italy at 60 years old from complications from his diabetes and liver disease, both severely worsened by Carnera's refusal to stop drinking. Oh, Primo, no, you can't. Refused to stop drinking. Might have lived a few years longer. Years as contender. Primo entered the top 10 in his second year as a contender in 1929. He was in the top 10 through 1935. Primo was annually ranked in the top 10 for 7 straight years, 6 of them in the top 4, 3 in the top 3, 1 as undisputed heavyweight champion. Competition faced Jack Sharkey twice, won 1, lost 1, Paulino Uscadun, Tommy Loughlin, King Levinsky, Ernie Shaft, Max Baer, Joe Louis. Primo faced 7 fighters ranked number 3 or higher in their career and beat 5 of the 7 at least once. He faced 4 Hall of Famers and beat 2 at least once. He also faced the following opponents ranked in their careers: Leroy Haynes, Isidoro Gastanaga, Walter Newsom, Ernie Shaft. He beat 3 of the 4. He beat 8 of the 11 opponents he faced who were ranked in their careers. Claims Primo suffered from gigantism are without any proof of any kind. There's absolutely no proof he suffered from that. To be clear, there's no medical proof of any kind this is so. His family never acknowledged such a claim, and no medical records or diagnosis of any kind exist to support it. A theory that Primo had gigantism has been floated in recent years due to his pronounced jaw, but like I said, no medical proof whatsoever. Further, there are significant medical signs Carnero did not suffer from gigantism. Okay? His hands and feet, while huge, were not unusually large for a man his size. His physique was not that of a man typically affected with gigantism, but rather an extremely muscular, huge athlete. Further, he did not keep growing once he obtained his adult size. In addition, he lived until he was 60, and while he died of liver cirrhosis and diabetes, neither appeared related to gigantism. Okay? Both his liver woes and diabetes is exhaustively relayed by Thomas Hauser. There are no records, no diagnosis, no nothing relating his death to gigantism, okay? Now, his career was influenced by organized crime, right? Just as Rocky's, Sonny Liston's was 20 years later, in the sense they took his money, right? Like they took all Boxer's money. Primo Carnera. Okay, Primo was a very, very good heavyweight in an era of them. History has not been kind to him, which is a shame. He was actually a very good heavyweight, okay? Final one is James J. Braddock. Let's touch on Jay. William, old school. What's up, old school? I didn't know you was in here. On the way to Mississippi for work. Yeah, we're talking about the 5 heavyweights that preceded Joe Louis, old school. You would have liked this one, if you would have been here, old school. Because old school is a historian too. Remember old school before Louis in the 30s? Jack Sharkey, Max Smelly, Primo Carnera, Max Baer, and James J. Bradley. Man, old school did a show on Max Baer before. Yeah, and we covered all of them today, old school. Now we're gonna take a look at Braddock. Yeah, and old school know about how Ron Howard misportrayed Baer in the movie Cinderella Man. Yeah, that was terrible. He didn't mention none about Baer and Frankie Campbell's wife at the hospital when Frankie Campbell was dying. None of that, man. Ron Howard conveniently left all of that out. Well, let's take a look at James J. Braddock real quick. Okay, the final one of the 5 heavyweights that preceded Joe Louis. And Braddock was the one that Joe Louis actually took the title from. After all 5, he beat all of them, but Braddock was the one he took the title from. after all 5 of these heavyweights preceded him. Sharkey, Smelling, Carnera, Bear, and Braddock in that order. And Braddock was the one Lewis took it from. And actually, Max Smelling was supposed to get that fight, remember, because Max Smelling had beat Joe Louis. And Max Smelling became the #1 contender, but they didn't want him to get his hands on that title, so they gave Joe Louis the title shot. Yeah, but yeah, they really screwed Max Smelling over in that. Joe Louis eventually became champion, but at the time he got it, he was not supposed to get it because that was supposed to have been Max Smelling's fight. Because remember, Max Smelling beat him. Louis was #1 contender. Smelling was #2. Smelling beat Joe Louis, so Smelling became the #1 contender. Joe Louis dropped back, but when it came, that was a title eliminator. The winner was supposed to get James J. Braddock, but the loser got him. Joe Louis. So yeah, that was very unfair to Smelling. But like I said, they didn't want him to get his hands on that title, right? Yeah, because they knew what would happen. He would use it as a propaganda tool and say, see, I told you the Nazis are so superior. We even got the heavyweight title. And like I said, back then the heavyweight title really meant a lot more than it does nowadays. The heavyweight champion was like one of the biggest sports figures in the world back then. You know, heavyweight champion of boxing? Yes. Okay, but let's take a look at James J. Braddock. I found everybody else except for this last. This is the last one now. I'm having trouble getting it. Come on, James J. You're the last one. There it is. If you're just going to take a quick look at Braddock. No, you know what? Yeah, that's hurt real fast. I wanted to drop the link. I can get old school up here on these from these fighters, because old school know a lot about this period, man. Before we go out of here. Braddock, come on, Braddock. We're gonna get like 15 minutes to link time. I can't find him. That makes it even better. Oh, there he is right there. Okay. Yeah, Braddock, also known as the Cinderella Man, he was a notable American heavyweight boxer. He gained fame during the 1930s. His boxing career is characterized by several key points. His early career. He turned pro in 1926 and had a promising start, but he faced challenges including injuries and financial difficulties during the Great Depression. Now, comeback. After a series of losses, Braddock made a remarkable comeback in the late 1930s. His win over Max Baer in 1935 for the heavyweight championship is particularly famous. This fight is often cited as a classic example of an underdog triumph against the odds. You still in here, old school? I want to drop the link. Because, yeah, talk about these 1930s with old school for like 15 minutes because I got to get out here at 4. I'm going to drop the link. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let me see. Okay. Damn. Okay. See, I'm rushing and messing up. When you rush, you only mess up. Right? Take your time. But how's everybody? It's Tuesday, right? I'm gonna do the family boxing show on Monday because I have a whole weekend. Because I found a whole bunch I found like 80 something of them, man. Brothers, sisters, fathers, children that box. Yeah, I never imagined it was that many. Never imagined it was that many families that boxed. Wow. Yeah, had that many brothers. I think Tommy Hearns fought his brother in the amateurs. I forgot his name, yeah. But like Puro was saying yesterday, that was common in the amateurs, but not on the pro level. Because amateurs is just 3 quick rounds. You can get in there and rough your brother up. That ain't no more than fighting at home in the backyard, when you get mad at your brother. My big brothers and beat me up for the left for 3 rounds when I was little, so just in the backyard fight. So yeah, but not like a 12 round fight against your brother. No, I wouldn't, But Mel said he would fight Jamal. They was on, I think it was the Breakfast Club one time, and Mel said, hell yeah, if the money, Mal said, no, I wouldn't fight my brother. Mel said, hell yeah, if the money right, I'll fight his ass. Mel said he'd get in there with him. If the money right. Mal was like, no, Mel like, shit. Damn right I'll fight him. Then I believe he would. Come on, man, I can't get this damn screen. There's the link. Okay, let's continue with the Cinderella Man. Just in case somebody hits it. Yeah, early career. Yeah. But he had some difficulties, but he did make a good comeback. After a series of losses, he got the title from Max Baer in 1935. This is Jim Braddock for the heavyweight championship. Now, this fight is often cited as a classic example of an underdog triumphing against the odds. Now, his style and skills. Braddock was known for his resilience, determination, and strong right hand. He was not the fastest or most technically skilled boxer, but his grit and ability to absorb punishment were significant assets in the ring. Championship reign. Now, Braddock held the heavyweight title from 1935 to 1937. His reign was marked by his willingness to fight difficult opponents, including a title defense against Joe Louis, where he lost his title in 1937. That was Joe Louis's first title when he got it, when he began the historic 12-year run. Was from James J. Braddock, 1937. Yeah. That's when Joe Louis began that historic run. Yeah, this link is for anybody, though, okay, that wants to hit it. Okay, so, yeah, that's when Joe Louis got his first title from James J. Braddock in 1937. Now, Braddock's legacy. Braddock's story is often seen as an inspirational tale of perseverance. His life and career were later depicted in the 2005 film Cinderella Man, which helped to revive interest in his legacy. And that's where Ron Howard just did Max Baer dirty, man. Didn't mention nothing about Max, and he talked about how the guy died, Frankie Campbell, after Max Baer, and another guy. But he never mentioned nothing about what actually happened at the hospital with the man's wife. He never mentioned that Max Baer put this guy's children, all of his children, through college. And for the rest of his life, Max Baer took care of this man's family, right? But Braddock, in summary, while Braddock may not be considered among the all-time greats in terms of technical skill, his remarkable comeback, tenacity, and the historical context of his achievements during a challenging era in American history solidify his place in boxing history. Yeah, James J. Braddock. Yeah, I guess old school must be gone, so we get ready to get out of here now. Yeah, I got to go at 4. Come on, man. I just hit my own link. I'm already up here. Why do I have to hit the link? Right? I don't need to hit the link. I'm already up here. Okay, good. Yeah, we getting out at 4. But yeah, what were some of Braddock's most notable fights? Besides the one against Max Baer that we talked about, what were some of his most notable fights? Okay, old school says Braddock was more of a light heavyweight. Yeah, he was, than a real heavyweight. That is right, old school. He was more of a light heavyweight. Yes, he was. Now, Braddock had several notable fights throughout his career. In addition to his famous win over Max Baer, here are a few key matches. Braddock versus John Henry Lewis, 1934. This fight was significant as it marked Braddock's comeback after a series of losses. Although he lost to Lewis, also, the fight showcased his determination and set the stage for his later successes. Braddock versus Tommy Farr, 1937. In this fight, this was the title eliminator. Braddock faced the tough Welsh boxer Tommy Farr. Braddock won a hard-fought decision, which secured his shot at the heavyweight title against Joe Louis. Yeah, this was after he had lost to Louis, right? Braddock versus Joe Louis, 1937. Although Braddock lost this fight, it was notable as it marked the end of his reign as heavyweight champion. Louis won by knockout in the 8th round, solidified his dominance in the heavyweight division. Braddock versus Art Lasky, 1936. This fight was crucial for Braddock in establishing himself as a top contender. He won by decision, which helped pave the way for his title shot against Max Baer. Braddock versus Paulino Uskadon, 1935. This fight was another important victory that contributed to Braddock's rise. He won by decision, further building momentum before facing Baer. These fights illustrated Braddock's resilience and ability to compete at a high level, even against tough opponents, solidified his legacy in the heavyweight boxing scene. Braddock, yeah, it's cool, old school. Yeah, we can ready to get out anyway, but yeah, I appreciate you. Yeah, we talked about the 30s, all those heavyweights leading up to Lewis. I knew you knew a lot about that. We've talked about that before, being old school. Yeah, again, they were before Joe Louis in the 30s. They were Jack Sharkey, Max Smelling, Primo Carnera, Max Baer, and James Braddock. He was right before Louis. He was the one Louis won the title from. Okay, but that was some great heavyweights and some great fights. Let's review it like we did in the beginning. Before we go, this is what happened. Now, before Joe Louis became the heavyweight champion in 1937, the title was held by James J. Braddock, who defeated Max Baer in 1935. Now, prior to Braddock, Baer held the title, winning it from Primo Carnera in 1934. Carnera had won the title in 1933. Before Carnera, Jack Sharkey held the title, defeating Max Smelling in 1932. Smelling had previously won the title from Sharkey in 1930. 32 was the rematch. 30 was the fight where the only heavyweight fight title ever won on a foul, remember? And when Sharkey got it back in 1932, a lot of people thought Smelling had beat him comfortably. Jack Dempsey, Gene Tunney, some former fighters said Smelling got robbed, but they was trying to play keep away from Hitler, the title. So they gave it to Sharkey, but Smelling clearly won the title. But they didn't want Hitler to get over there in Germany. But these were the 5 fighters preceding Joe Louis. He beat all 5 of them that had the title before him. But all 5 of these, most of them fought each other. Yeah, all great heavyweight champions of the 1930s. Yeah. 5 great fighters. Okay. Appreciate everybody that stopped by today. William Old School Arant of the Army White Man Podcast, Al Booger, The Drunk Irishman, BBO Sports TV, Way Up the Exploding Fist Ninja out of England, great country of England, the UK, The Drunk Irishman, Mike Rim, Miss Cass. Appreciate everybody. Okay? We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Cass Sports. Because if it's Monday through Friday, 2 p.m., it's the Boxtorian bringing you all that boxing history. Everybody have a great afternoon. Appreciate y'all 1,000%.